Like I said, everything that you're going to work in terms of automation or in terms of some tools in the organizations will be completely on Unix or Linux. So let's try to first understand completely from an overview of what exactly this is. So if you look, majorly all our laptop, what we used to work, it'll be on Windows. Now, what is the requirement that you need a different operating system other than Windows? Because Windows is quite good for us. You have so many UIs. I can see few things, click on that. I have proper documentation. Everything is fine. Being that, why do you need operating system like Unix where you almost connect it through some command prompt and you'll be entering only the commands. There is no proper UI also. So the primary reason for that is if you take Windows, so the first problem is security. You might be seeing that there are so many viruses or other worms that get into Windows very easily, and it's tough if you don't maintain it. And second thing is, if you want to connect to a machine and work, only one user can connect to a Windows machine. So, but going back to organization, both the problems of security as well as multi-users is not possible from Windows. So to have much more productivity, you need many people to work on a same machine because you have to share the resources. I cannot just give one Windows box to one person and ask him to just do if he's not working on anything else, you are underutilizing the resource. So that is when, based on these two important things, that is how good the security can be and in terms of the multi-user connectivity, wherein the things which cannot be done by Windows, they came up with operating system called Unix. Okay, so Unix is a different operating system which overcomes these two problems. Now, talking about Unix, when people came up with Unix, there are different flavors that existed. And when the first Unix that people came up, it was more of a licensed or more of a enterprise based. Just like how Windows is being owned by Microsoft, the Unix which we people started using was of different flavors. What I mean by that is HP came up with their own Unix operating system, or they came up with their own flavor of Unix system called as HP UX or HP Unix. And then IBM came up with their own particular operating system, that is Unix operating system called DEC. And then Oracle came up, or the before that, Sun actually came up with their own Unix version or Unix flavor called as Solaris. So like this, every one of them came up with their own flavor of Unix. Okay, and it was more of owned by their organization, and it was used specifically for working on some application for their purpose. Like HP, all the products they used to run on that. Sun, and basically after that, the Oracle bought over Sun. So everything from the Oracle they run on Solaris. Right now, IBM, anything that they have, they'll be running on that AIX or DEC. So like this, they used this operating system called Unix specific to their requirement and the product, and they changed it. So that's how initially Unix as an operating system came, which will overcome the problems that we cannot do it in Windows. Now, in that, further, because of so many changes in the market, people started bringing in a concept called open source. So when I say open source, it is all about, rather than licensing or putting it up in an enterprise, being more common to the public or the generic people where we can use. So that is what we call it as open source. So anyone can pretty much use it, and at the same time, you can contribute back to the community in terms of this open source. So in that case, from the enterprise version of the Unix, they came up with open source Unix flavors. Okay, so in that case, people came up with a different Unix system, which was called as Linux. So the very first Linux that came is nothing but the open source version or the open source flavor of Unix. So Linux is again a Unix operating system only, but it was more of an open source. No one is owning it. So in that, there are many types that you might have heard further, like FreeBSD or specific to CentOS, Ubuntu, Fedora. That's how things came. And now in that, Red Hat took a Linux and they did some modification and they started giving it on their own enterprise version. So that is when we also have Red Hat Linux. So like this, Linux is nothing but a flavor of Unix with certain changes. And in the beginning, it came more as a open source operating system, but later on, Red Hat did some changes and they gave a new flavor of Linux or a release under their name, which was called as Red Hat. If not, all the CentOS, Ubuntu, Fedora, all these things are Linux operating system. And if you look back, Linux is nothing but a Unix itself. It's just the name because of the license that it came, and there are certain changes also from the architecture. But other than that, for a generic user, Linux is nothing but a Unix operating system only. Okay, so you need to understand this first. So now companies will be using most of Linux only because of it open source nature, and there's a lot of security advantage that we have in Linux. Okay, so that's why you might hear a lot of operating system names like CentOS, Ubuntu. These two are very common, and then Red Hat. So these are the ones which you'll be hearing it a lot. So now, whenever I say Unix or Linux, both are one and the same. Okay, so don't think that Unix is separate and Linux is separate. So now, how different is this Unix or Linux operating system from the Windows? So to understand this, basically any operating system that you take, regardless of whether it's Unix or Windows, we need some files which will be called as the operating system. So that files which takes care of whatever activity that we want to do or whatever that you want to run is called as kernel. So specifically talking to the Unix operating system, kernel is the heart of the operating system. Okay, so that is the one which will take some input from the user or whatever that we want to do. We will tell to the kernel and it will get in touch with the hardware specifically, and using the hardware, it will try to give us some output or does some task. So kernel is the heart of the operating system, which will do all the activities, what to do, when to do, how to do, it'll take care of everything by connecting to the hardware and getting the tasks done. Okay, so kernel is the heart. Now, on top of the kernel, there will be something called as a shell. So what do you mean by a shell? So basically, if you want to connect to a Unix or a Linux machine, you need something called as an environment, because whatever that you're going to do, we need to be able to interact with the kernel. So that environment as such, through which we will be able to interact to the kernel and give whatever commands or whatever that instructions we want to give to the kernel through this environment only. So environment is nothing but some specific configuration you can have based on which it'll connect to the kernel and do some activity. So that environment is what we call it as a shell in Unix. So shell is nothing but an environment where it will be helping us to interact through the shell to the kernel. So now, if you want to do something, you will always work on an environment which is called as shell. So when you connect to a Unix operating system, you will be getting an environment which is nothing but a shell on which you will be typing some command or whatever the tasks or instructions that you have to do, you'll be doing it. So remember, shell is nothing but an environment through which we'll be able to interact to the kernel. And in fact, it is the place where we will be entering all the commands. Now, in the shell, we can have certain commands which we want to run are created by us, or we can also have certain libraries which the operating system gives us. So these are called as utilities. So utilities are nothing but some programs or commands through which we will tell what is the exact instruction to the kernel or operating system. So in that case, the commands or the utilities or the programs, whatever that we execute, we will be executing it from the shell only. So that is how, if you look at this diagram, you can see utility is a wrapper around the shell. So we will go to the shell, and in the shell, we will give the program or the instruction saying that this is what I want to do. For example, you want to copy a file, create a file, run a program, whatever that you want to do. So there will be a command or a program which is called as utility, and that you will running, I mean that you will be running it on a shell. And in that case, utilities can be of two types. One is we can create our own user created program, or the operating system or the system itself gives certain commands or programs for us to use. So that is how everything is a layer by layer. So you will have a hardware, on top of that you will have kernel, and then on top of that you will have shell, and then you will have utilities. So using the utilities on the shell, we will give the instruction to the kernel where it will take that information and work with the hardware based on what is that we have to do. Okay, so remember, shell is the environment through which we'll be working. So anytime you connect to any Unix or Linux machine, what you will see there is a shell, which is nothing but an environment. Now, when you're talking about shell, there are different types of shells available in the Unix or Linux. And what exactly each one of them is a specific environment through which you will be able to do some specific task. So in that case, the type of the shell you can see are bound shell, corn shell, bound again shell, and C shell. These are the four most popularly used shells or environments in Unix. But out of this, these corn shell or C shell, and in fact even bound shell, is kind of outdated because of certain security issues and more and more not, I mean, more and more being complex. People nowadays, if you see, are using only this shell called bash. So if you go back and see to a machine you have connected, you will be connected through an environment called shell, and that majority of the cases will be bound shell or bound again shell. Okay, so bash is the default shell on which you will be working on many of the machines as of now because of so many advantages that it has, and it is easy for doing administration of the machine using this. Okay, okay, so now that is about the shell. So now, what will be there in an operating system or a kernel? What do you mean exactly by the operating system or a kernel? So basically, it is a set of files through which we will be able to do certain things. In the same way, how you, if you say I want to install Windows, you will have a C drive. Inside the C drive, you will have a Windows or a System32 folder, and inside which you will be having all the files or libraries through which you will be able to do all the tasks, whatever we are doing, right? In the same way, how does the files which is required for the kernel or the operating system will be in Unix? Okay, so these directory structure is what we call it as file system. Okay, so file system is nothing but the files using which we will be working on this operating system. So in Unix or Linux, everything begins with a slash, which is a forward slash, and this is called as root. Okay, so root is similar to a C drive in Windows. So by default, if you install anything in Windows, it will go to the C drive, right? If you want, additionally, you can have D drive, E drive, or A drive, whatever that you want. But we can never change by default the C drive to something else. So if you open a laptop or install Windows on your laptop, It is always going to create a C drive, and in that you'll be putting the operating system files, or that is where it gets installed, right? So in the same way, in Unix, everything gets started from the root, and the hierarchy will be from this root itself. Okay, just like C on Windows, in Unix, everything will be root. And inside the root, it will be having many folders through which we will be able to store certain files and run certain things for the operating system. Okay, so the file system architecture begins with the root, and internally you'll be having many folders. So the parent directory of an operating system, that is of an Unix operating system in any machine, is root or slash, and everything begins from there. So it's a tree. From there, it goes down to many directories of folders inside everything. So in the root, if you see, you'll be having certain folders inside it. Okay. So some of the folders that are will be created by the operating system when you install that operating system, and it is used for some specific operating system task. And other than that, we will also have certain directories where we can store some files for our purpose and work. Okay, so in that case, you can see a folder called bin, which will be available inside the root. And this bin folder will usually contain all the operating system executables, or all the commands or programs which the operating system gives us. It will be present inside this bin. So there will be sometimes one more folder called user, and inside user you can also have a bin or this. So bin means it is a folder where you will have all the programs or the operating system commands in it. Okay, and then etc. So there will be a folder called etc in all the operating system under your root, and this etc folder will contain all the configuration files specific to the operating system. So when I say operating system, you have to do so many configurations and various things, right? All the configuration related information that you have to do for the operating system, everything will be available inside your etc folder. So anything that you want to configure in the operating system, it will be on a file inside etc. Okay, and then if there are some shared library or some files specific to the kernel, and that will be present inside lib folder. So the lib folder contains all the libraries specific to the kernel. Okay, now once you know this, then the next thing what you need to know is there is a folder called proc. So what do you mean by this proc? So in Unix, whenever you run something or do something, how does the operating system as such will try to understand what you are running and keep a track of what you're doing. So in fact, whatever that you run on a Unix machine, that is on a shell environment, anything that you run will be basically treated as a process. So a process is nothing but it is certain definition through which the kernel will allocate some hardware or the resources of the machine, and it will be doing some task. So that is how anything that you run on the operating system, it will be creating a process, and through the process it will be handling everything whatever you have to do. So in that fact, anything that you run on the shell or the environment, there will be one process created, and for that process there will be one ID, and using that, kernel will be knowing what exactly it is doing, what it has to do, and it will be handling that. So like that, remember, every command that you run in Unix or Linux will be tracked as a process in the backend by the operating system. So that information about all the processes that is running in your operating system will be present inside the proc folder. So proc folder will contain all the processes which is running in your machine so that it can be easily tracked by the operating system. Okay, so remember that. And then now these are some of the important folders. Like this, you might also have certain configuration folders, but let's not worry. But let's go to the usage where will the user create his files and keep it? Because now, if you go to C drive on your Windows, you know you cannot put anything under System32. Then you will go to the desktop and store something, or under the C folder, you will create a new directory and start storing everything there. But in Unix, where will you store anything? And if you look, it is not just one user who is going to connect to the machine. Many users will connect. Wherein, if one user is using one folder, it should not be accessible by the other user, because if you by mistake delete others file, it will be a problem. So that is when each individual user who is connecting to the Unix operating system should have his own private space to create or delete files. So in that case, for every user in Unix, we will create something called as a home directory. A home directory is nothing but a specific directory inside your root, which will be assigned to a particular user. For example, you will have a folder called home inside the root, and inside the home, for each user, we can create one more folder inside it and ask them to use that. So let's say if I want to work on a machine. So for me, there will be one folder like /home, and inside the home, there will be a folder called Adam. So now whenever I want to use, I'll be using that directory to store files or to maintain whatever I need. So that is how home directory is the directory for each user where he'll be having all the rights to create something or put a file, delete a file, all those things he will have. Okay, so like this, every user who connects to the operating system will have his own what specifically home directory. Okay, so now what happens when a new account has to be created? So when you go to the Unix administrator and you will say that I need an account. So if he has to create an account, he will be creating an account with some user ID. So there will be some string called as user ID, which will be unique for you. So using that, you will be able to connect. So the administrator will create a user ID, which will be unique, and he'll create a password for that. So that now, if you want to connect to the machine, you have to use this user ID and the password. Only then you will be allowed to go inside the machine. Okay, so like that, for every user, he will have to create a user ID and a password. And then what else? Now, after creating an account, there should be a home directory created for him. So that is when the next thing that they will do is create a home directory, so that now whenever this person goes to a particular machine, then he will be always working on this home directory, and here he will have all the permission to create file, modify or delete whatever he wants he can do. So he will get a private directory to do the changes. So like this, for every user, he has to create a home directory and associate it to that user. And then now, along with it, you also need a shell. That is what I said, because here, if you see, if I connect to any machine, what is that I need? I need an environment, because whatever you connect to a machine, there will be an environment or shell on which you will be running. So if I connect to any machine, now whatever that you see here is nothing but a shell, which is an environment. So I can see that it is using a bash based shell. So that is when what the administrators will do is, along with creating a home directory, they will also set the environment or the default environment for the specific user. So now what happens is whenever you log into a machine using a username and password, based on this user ID, whatever home directory is allocated to you, you will go to that first. Okay, you will always go to the home directory associated with this user ID, and then it will be setting a environment based on what has been specified for this user ID. Okay, so after going to the home directory, it will set the environment specific to what is the type of shell that you have specified. Okay, so that is the second thing that happens. And finally, there will be something called as login scripts. So these login scripts will run as soon as you connect to a machine. So when you connect to a machine, first it will create a shell, go to the home directory of that user, and then it will try to run a default script which gets triggered every time you connect to the machine. So using this script, you can give the details about values of whatever that you want and what you want to set in this shell. That is what you will be doing it. Okay, so remember, when you connect to the machine, these are the three things that happens. A home directory will be a set, and then the default shell, whatever is assigned to that user, it will be set, and it will also set certain environment specific to the user. Okay, so now in this shell, which is nothing but the environment. So if you see, we are working on the shell. Now in this shell or the environment, this is where we will be running all the commands. And here we will be using something called as variable. And variable is nothing but a place in which it will be storing some value and you can reuse it. Okay, suppose let's say I am going to call some command again and again. So if you want, you can create something called as a variable and store a name or whatever reference you want, and whenever you reach to the variable, it will try to give you the value which is stored inside it. So in that case, if you create a variable to store something on your environment, it will be called as environment variables. So an environment variable is nothing but a variable which stores some specific value and you can reuse it within your environment. Okay, so there is a command called env. If you just type it, it will show all the list of environment variables that you have in this machine for each user. Okay, so like this, you can set the environment, and also if there is something specific which you want to set as an environment variable, it will be available in the shell. Okay, so for example, now I want to create a variable called my name and I need to give the value to it. So if you want to do, then the syntax for creating a variable or an environment variable is first variable name and equal to value. Okay, so remember this. On the left hand side, the name of the variable equal to, and on the right hand side, whatever that you give, it will be stored as a value to this variable. So now whenever you refer to this, the value whatever you have stored inside it will be used. Okay, and how do you get back the value of the variable that you have created? So to get back, simply say $variable whatever that you have given name, and it will be giving back whatever value that has been stored inside this variable. Okay, so for example, now if I'm trying to print, it says that there is no such environment variable available. So let's create a variable first. Okay, and I'll say Adam, and now let's try to run this. So you can see that if you have created an environment variable, it will give back the value whatever that you have stored. Okay, so remember, we will be talking about all these things called environment variables little later also. But environment variable is nothing but a place where you can store some value which you can reuse it. So it is something similar to program or whatever script you want to write, where within a script or a program you want to store some value and reuse it. In the same way, for your environment, there will be some values which you want to reuse it. So that is how you will create as an environment variable and store something. Whereas the operating system also stores and maintains many environment variables, and using that we will be able to do certain tasks. In fact, when you say this login script, there is something called login script which will get triggered whenever a user connects to a machine. Using this, you will be setting this environment variable, and it plays an important role. Okay, so clear so far on what happens when you connect to a machine, and what is a shell, and what is the environment variable, and in case how to create an environment variable and retrieve a value from that.
Yes, yes.
Kirti?
Yes, please go on.
Okay, so remember, any machine that you connect, this is an environment, or we don't call it as an environment anymore, it is a shell. Okay, so now in this there are a couple of environment variables which the operating system uses to run some command or to understand. So even the operating system will use certain environment variables. So everything will be listed using this env command. So if you say env, whatever user defined and the standard environment variable which the operating system needs, and whatever that you have set it up inside the login script, when you log in, which will set it up, everything will be there. Okay, so in that, one of the important environment variable is path. Okay, so to understand that, if you see, I was typing some command, any command that I want to run. Okay, so it executes something, right? Some command, whatever I do, it gives me some output. Let's not worry about this now. Now, if I run some other junk, it says command not found. So how does it knows that if I type some command like clear or ls, whatever it is, it needs that it is a command? How does it knows? Because wherever that the files are there, pretty much if you see where this is coming from this location. So how does it know exactly this is in this location? You see, it picks up, whereas we didn't tell anything. So in fact, Windows or Unix, how does it know where is the command? And at the same time, if I type something, how does it know this is not a command? So to understand this, in Unix or Windows, there is a environment variable called path. And how do I get the value of an environment variable? In Unix, you will say it as dollars and you will get it. In case if it was Windows, for example, this is my Windows. And Windows, you will say percentage, the variable name percentage. That is the only difference. This is my Windows and this is the Unix shell. Okay. So what is the purpose of this? So if you run any command in Unix, what will happen is it will try to go through all the directories that you have given in this, which is separated by colon. So you can see that this is nothing but a path, the path which is available in your machine, which is separated by colon. So like this, if you enter a command, it will go through all the directories that you have given here, and if the command whatever that you are running is available in any one of them, then it will take that and run. And if it is not available in any of the directory that you have specified here, then it will give it as a command not found. So now what is that needed? If you install any application or something, the directory of where it is available should be put to this path variable, wherein sometimes the application itself will add it. If not, we have to add it manually. So that is how, if you look, where was this command? It is obtaining or picking it up from user bin. So do you think it's there? Yes. So you see this? So now let's say you are installing some new application and you will get some binaries which you want to run. So how does the operating system recognize it? That is because to this, you have to add a colon and then add the directory of whatever that you're going to add. Okay, so only then the operating system will be recognizing that. So where can I see the values of the path? So what you have to do is you have to modify the environment variable in this login script. Okay, so there will be a file called profile.profile, or you can see dot bash rc. In case if your shell, the default shell is of bash type, you will see it as dot bash rc or dot profile in your home directory. Because when you connect to a machine, by default, you will be going inside home directory, and in this, you will be having these two files, and that is what will get triggered, and this path variable will be set using this. That is how every time when you log into a machine, a new shell will come, and in that, using this profile script, you will be setting all the environment variables and path. So in this, if you want to just add a value, you just have to say like this. So what will happen if I say path and the new path? So this means that dollar path means what? So even before that, anything on your right hand side will get evaluated, and the value of this will be stored towards the left hand side. So in that case, I'm saying you add a value, whatever that you have on the right hand side, to this path environment variable. And in that, first you are saying dollar path, which means it will replace the dollar path with whatever is the existing value, and to that you are appending a new value. That is how you will be adding a new value. Because if I directly say path equal to some directory, what will happen? You are overwriting everything, and now if you say echo dollar path, this directory alone will be there. But what we want is to append. So that is how, if you say dollar here path, it will get all the previous value. To that you can just say colon and new path. That is how you'll be adding it inside your profile or directly on your environment when you connect to a machine. Okay. Okay, so with that, let's see little more things in Unix. So in Unix, everything is a file at the end. That is why it is quite easy that we can maintain, and that is the reason virus attack or whatever that you hear is not on Unix, because even if a virus comes into the machine, it's just a file. You can pick a file and delete a file easily, whereas in Windows it's not just a simple file. So that's the reason it's difficult to remove everything. So remember, in Unix everything is file. And where will you put a file? So there are many files that we'll be using in Unix. So all these files will be organized as a folder or a directory. So in Windows, you basically call it as a folder. In Unix, you will be calling it as a directory. Okay. And in fact, if you go back to the file system, everything begins from the root. wherein root itself is a directory under which you will be having many folders or directories inside it, and specific to each directory you'll be storing some files, right? So that is how you'll be having. So in that case, in Unix, the types of file that you can have is, one is ordinary files. When I say ordinary files, anything that you have which in the format of text that you can put and read it, or any program that you want to run or execute. So all these things will be considered as a normal file. Okay, and then the other type is directory. So the difference is you will be storing something inside a directory, wherein you can store files inside directory, or you can have a directory inside directory also. Okay, and other than that, we will be having some special file types. These are nothing but all our hardware, such as your hard disk, ROM, modem, or any adapters that you want to connect to your operating system. Everything will still be considered as file, but it will be of a special type of a file. Okay. And one more thing that you need to remember is in Unix, there is nothing called as extension because everything is a file. In in Windows, if you see, you will have an extension for everything, and without that it will not work. What I mean is, if you create a text file, you will be having a name called .txt at the end, right? If you try to rename that text, then it will not be a text file anymore, and Windows will not know how to open it. If it is a document or a Word document, then it will be having a .doc. So there you have an extension, because without that extension, it will not be knowing what file. So it is the name of the file and the extension. But in Unix, there is no concept called extension because everything is treated as a file. Okay, so remember that. So coming back to the directory structure. So now in Unix, everything begins from root. So whatever that you have, the first top level directory in Unix is root, and inside that you will be having everything, correct? And for every user, there will be a directory called home directory, and in that you will be having all the permissions to create any files or folder that you want. Okay, so when you connect to a machine, by default you will be going to that home directory. All right. Now, if you want to change or move from one directory to the other directory, how is that you're going to do? If it is Windows, I can open up a Windows Explorer, double click and go. But in Unix, everything will be through command. So what is the command that you will be using for that? So we'll be having a command called cd, which is for change directory. So at any point of time, if you want to go to your home directory from wherever you are, then use the option called tilde. So this wavy symbol, what you see is called as tilde. This you can see it on your left top corner of your keyboard, just below the escape button, or just towards the left of the numeric 1. You will be seeing this. So if you say cd and tilde, it will take you to the home directory, whatever is being assigned to you. Okay. So now, other than that, if there is any specific directory, you can always go to that using the cd, wherein you have to specify what is the directory that you want to go to, or what is the path that you want to go to, and the cd will change the location of your current directory to that location. Okay, so for example, here, so if you see, this is the directory assigned to me as the home directory. Okay, so if I want to go to some particular directory, I will say cd and that directory. So now if you see, you are inside the root, and inside root you'll be having all the folder structures that you have. Okay, and if I want to go back to my home directory, I will say cd delta, and to know what is your current directory on which you are working, you will say pwd. So pwd means present working directory, and you can see I moved from root to this, and if you see the list of files inside is different, right? You can see the content is changing. That is because this was inside the root, which is a separate directory or a path, and now we are inside a separate path. Okay. When you're looking at it, now you see this is the path. Now in this, the first slash that you see at the leftmost corner is the root. Okay. And what are these? After the first slash that you see on the leftmost corner, this is nothing but a differentiation between two directories. So what this means is, inside your root, there is one folder called C, and inside the C, you have one more folder called users. Okay, and inside users, you have one more directory or folder called this. So after the first slash, which is root, the next slashes is the differentiation between two directories. So here it means you are under C folder. Inside the C, there is a subdirectory called users, and inside the subdirectory is what you are. Okay. Now, if you want to go back or go to any other directory, you can just see this. So for example, if I say /c, you can see that I have moved from this to this. And inside this, you can see there are various folders. Okay, like this, you can see that each one of us the directory. So remember, only the first slash represents the root, and inside root you have C, and inside C you have users. Okay, so that is what the slash represent. Now, if you want to move from one directory to other directory, I will use this path. Okay, so I will say cd and the path, it will take me. As you see, whenever I say cd and it will take. Now, the path, whatever you are giving here, this way of giving a path which will always begin from the root is what we call it as absolute path. Suppose if I want to go to C users, if I say C users, now whenever I want to refer to this, I am saying the complete path from the root. That is, I am saying, hey, in the root, there is one C folder, and inside the C folder, there is users. Please go there. Suppose if I want to go to this, so again, I'll say this way. So like this, whenever you give the path right from the root, then this path, what we give is called as absolute path. Absolute path means you are referring it from the root to the place where you want to go. So you are telling the complete path. Okay, this way of specifying is called as absolute path. Now, sometimes it will not be convenient for us to give the complete path. So in that case, we can do something called as a relative path. So what do you mean by relative path? For example, I am inside this C users folder. Okay, and inside that, if you see, you are having one folder called this. And if you want to go inside this, one way that I said is you can simply say C users, and inside this you can give this way. It will take you. But instead of doing this, you can give a relative path where are you currently? You are already inside this, right? So you don't have to give this once again because you are already inside it. So instead of giving this fully, if you just say go to this directory, now where is this directory? In your current working directory. So it will go. So you can see it has moved. So this way of giving a directory name with the reference of where you are currently is what we call it as relative path. For example, once again, I'll go to the C. Now, if I want to go to this folder, or if I want to first go to users, what is that I will say? Instead of saying C users, I can simply say users. That means inside the existing directory, is there a folder or directory by the name users? Then go there. Okay, you see, you went. Now, the same thing if I want to go to this folder, then you can just say users. You see the difference? So in relation or in relative to where you are currently, if you give the path, this way is called as relative path. So you can now give it whatever directory that you want. Okay, so like this, with the reference of where you are, you can give. This is something where if you want to go deep inside one another directory, but what if you want to come back? Let's say you want to go to, see, you are inside this. Now I want to go back to this. So one way is see users, I can say, but this is absolute path. How can I give a relative path to this? Because you are not trying to go to a folder inside this, but you want to go back to the parent of this. So that is when you can use something called as double dot. So in Unix, double dot means the parent directory. So where are we currently? We are in this. So what is the parent directory of this directory? That is C users, right? So see this, you came back. If I say cd double dot, you will come back to C. If you say cd double dot, you will go back to root. Okay. So this way of specifying to go to the parent directory, you can simply say cd. Now here, let's say from this directory, I want to go to C. One way I can say C, it will take me. If not, if I say double dot, it will take me to the parent. From here itself, if I say slash and one double dot, what I'm saying is go to the parent directory and in that do a double dot, then go to that parent directory. So see what happens. It will directly take me to C folder now. Suppose if I had given one more slash, then it would have taken me to the root. If I say double dot, double dot, double dot. So that is how, if you see, this slash represents differentiation between some directory. So you're saying take to the directory, parent directory, and inside, if you have one more parent directory for that, take me that. And in that, do you have a parent directory? Take me that. So you had gone to the root. Okay, so that is how you can move to the parent directory. Not only that, let's do something else now. So now let's say you want to go to this default folder. Okay, you are inside C users and there is one folder. So you will simply say cd default. Okay, yeah, this is relative path. Now from this, if you want to go to this folder, how will you go? So where is this folder? This is under C users. You are under C users default folder. So you have to come out one level and then inside the users you have to go. So then you can simply say cd double dot and in that you will say this. See the difference? So double dot means go to the parent and in the parent go to this. So that is how in one stretch you can give like this. So this way of specifying the directory path is what we call it as relative path. Okay, getting it? So cd will tell you to to which directory you want to go, and pw will give you the current directory. And if you want to create a new directory, you will simply say mkdir under directory name. Okay, so okay, it's already exists. So I want to go, I have created a new folder called Adam2. So if I want to go inside it, where did I create? I created on my existing directory, right? So if I run like this, where it will create? It will create on your existing directory here. So now if you want to go inside it, you will say adam2. Okay, so you are inside the adam2. So if you want to go to some other folder like this with the relative to that, you will be doing it. Okay, so mkdir will create the directory. And if you want to remove or delete a directory, you say rmdir. Okay, there will be nothing. So mkdir is for creating a directory and rmdir is for deleting a directory. Okay, clear so far on creating a directory, moving a directory?
Yes.